Alright, so welcome to part 3 of 3 on direct resource. And so as we recap to this particular series, we would have completed the second of the 10 God series. And so with the materials that you have, so let us recap into the checklist, into finding out what are the crucial things that we need to have. So as usual, as we look into number 1, we here to explore the direct resource, not to direct resource. And so as we put the day master in this illustration to be fire, if fire is the day master, then direct resource will be the element that produces it. So therefore here, we will find that what are the things to do for direct resource. So direct resource in this illustration will be the wood. So the wood, direct resource will be the wood. And direct resource will be of opposite polarity. So if it is a pink fire day master, therefore it will be the wood wood element that will produce to the day master. Okay, so as we look into direct resource, as usual, the first thing that we do, what's the first thing that we do? We will of course have to check for the presence, we will check for the location, and we will check for the strength. But of course, all these things will only take place once we have the day master check. So as always, we always start with the day master. And from the day master, we look into the season that day master is born to identify whether the day master is strong or otherwise. And for today's focus, of course, will be on the direct resource. Whether direct resource is protruded, whether direct resource is penetrated into the stems. Anything that is penetrated into the stems or protruded to the stems represents a very core feature of the day master, because these are what the public will see. That will be what the person will make the reputation or known to it. So therefore that will be our direct resource if it is protruded or penetrated. If it represents the main chi, direct resource represents the main chi, then this will be the structure of the person as it is. And of course, we also consider if it is hidden, if the direct resource is hidden. Now, normally when we say hidden, we mean there are two concepts of hidden. All elements in the branches are all hidden. So therefore, that's the first part. All of them are hidden. But the second part of totally hidden will then be considered to be if the branch is a graveyard. So if it's a graveyard branches, then therefore the tomb or the storage, then this represents completely hidden. In a way, we consider that any elements within the graveyard, which by another nicer word would be the earth branches, they are deeper, they're hidden deeper and slower to be revealed. And sometimes the revelation of such chi will be when it is clash. Now, when earth meets earth, there is a tendency for a clash or some kind of bullying punishment that may come in. So therefore, we see that when earth meets earth, usually the chi will then be released. Therefore, that's where we will want to identify the look into the presence of the direct resource, check for its location, and then of course identify its strength to determine whether it's favorable or unfavorable. But more so than not, generally, without thinking too much, direct resource is always auspicious. It's always auspicious. But of course, if you dig deeper enough, there's always exception in everything. And therefore, generally is auspicious. Now, the word always auspicious here means regardless of whether the day master is strong or weak. That doesn't really count to begin with. But of course, when we go deeper, we will then begin to see what do we refer all about. Okay, so What do we mean by direct resource? Direct resource also means actual power. Therefore, direct resource represents the seal. The Chinese translation of the word direct resource is actually Cheng Yin, which is direct seal. It is represent the seal of the emperor or the official power. And so here we may consider that each of these elements have different concept of philosophy in them. So when we dealt with 7K, 7K believes that power is might. But the direct resource believes that power is official. Power is given from the top. Power is also knowledge. So knowledge is power. And the direct seal believes that it's actual power. And therefore one consider that any official style without resource is not real power. But we're going to go into that as we deal a lot. All right. And so we'll try to identify where that direct resource is, whether they are protruded, whether they are penetrated, and the likes of it. Okay, so let's continue. And usually as we, again, don't restrict solely for counting, but we do consider the number of direct resource, the presence of it, and how strong those direct resource represents. So now let's continue to where we left off since last week. Yeah. Okay. And so as we look into how direct resource interacts with other elements, the three key functions of a direct resource. The first is to produce the self. Now, to produce the self, it gives life to the day master and to rob wealth. And therefore, the production here represents that it supports. And so this is where we look into direct resource being the mother, being the teacher, being the mentor, being the nobleman, the coherent. Therefore, direct resource is always essential to the day master. The direct resource weakens, especially the 7 killing. And therefore, 7 killing represents illnesses, it represents challenges and hardship and bullying environment, petty people. So when it weakens the 7K, it becomes an element and it is an important element for life to take place. Therefore, direct resource represents health. Direct resource is a measure for a person's health. And thirdly, direct resource controls eating god. And it controls the hurting officer, especially hurting officer. Hurting officer is one that is rebellious, one that shows aggressive behavior. And so basically, if one wishes to be aggressive, or if one wishes to attack, one better be well informed, and direct resource gives that as it is. So direct resource is a symbol of status and identity. So that is where it says that if the officer star has no direct resource, there's no real power. The reputation and position would be unreal. So basically, it may be what we call a fake title. Now, in this country, there is one particular state where people are known to be able to buy titles. They're able to buy titles, and so this may be a case where when one doesn't have resource, one doesn't have official title, one resorts to fake titles. So we may find people having fake degrees or fake dignitary titles and so on. And therefore, that may be one where we say an officer without resource, without direct resource. Now, for those may be what we call imposter syndrome. The imposter syndrome is when one has a feeling of inadequacy. One feels that they are not qualified enough. Now, besides that, we also look into direct resource representing reputation, learning, as it is. Now, did mention earlier that direct resource people are aloof when it comes to politics. They don't have the necessary skills in scheming and in playing politics. And so that is where direct resource people without strong wealth, without strong 7K eating officer, eating god or hurting officer, they should not be in business. So that is where one of the very common questions that people tend to ask Pakcik readers would be, can I do business? And so that's why generally, direct resource structure, the answer is more often than not, no. And so now let's look into what happens when a direct resource counters a hurting officer. When I say counter hurting officers represents the children, represents the children. And so this is where one may consider that when direct resource counters a hurting officer, it may be one where a female may not have the privilege of having children. They may become high achievers in life. That's just a little bit of an old reading when it comes from that itself. And direct resource clash with the direct wealth star. So therefore, that's where this often be considered to be one of the readings that we often tend to see as it is. All right, okay, let's move along. And of course, the direct resource also weakens the 7 killing. Okay, if we can remember from our sharing on the 7 killing, if a person has 7 killing, the person should see direct resource. And so likewise here, it is often considered to be an auspicious element for direct resource to meet 7K. So the combination pulls each other sentimentally. So therefore, direct resource and 7K engenders and weakens one another. Therefore, the 7K submits to the direct resource. So indicating that the 7K becomes a refined 7K and becomes very good, as it is. Okay, so now let's move on to the next part where we look into the direct resource sitting on. Now, for you to be sitting on, for the direct resource to be sitting on, it would then indicate that direct resource is on the steps. That means we are referring to direct resource being on the steps. So the direct resource is either here or either here. So therefore, we're looking to direct resource sitting on. Now, sitting on what now? Sitting on what now? And then you will see the sitting on. Now, the one that is protruded to the steps represents your career, represents your facade. Therefore, these two represents important pillars, especially when it represents the prime of the person's, the prime years of the person's life. And so therefore, we would like to look into how direct resource sitting on is represented by their main characteristics. And so here, number one, we will take a route. We can look into direct resource sitting on friend. Now, direct resource produces the self or the friend. Therefore, this is a production. It is a production relationship. Usually, when we read productive relationship, it is auspicious. Generally. And therefore, here, direct star sitting on friend is auspicious. It contributes to the day master having a very good quality of life. So therefore, the day master prosper. Now, it doesn't mean that they will be extremely wealthy. Because why do we say that? Because the friend star, counters the indirect wealth. And so it will weaken the indirect wealth, which will weaken the entrepreneurial spirit or the self of the person. So therefore, this is where it's a good life, decent, just about that, as it is. Now, when direct resource sits on rock wealth, now rock wealth star represents the entrepreneur star. It represents strong business acumen. Therefore, direct resource sitting on rock wealth is auspicious. It will bring greater success in business. And therefore here, rob wealth, if the person asks, should I do business? The answer is yes. Let's take a look into a chart, shall we? Reed Hastings, a co-founder of Netflix. And where do we find direct resource on this G-Earth Day Master? You can find direct resource protruded into the career pillar. And this pink fire is the direct resource to the G-Earth. And fire born in autumn is trapped. It's weak, but it is rooted, therefore it's reasonably strong. And this direct resource sits on what? Huh? It sits on Wu Earth. Huh? It sits on Wu Earth. As it sits on Wu Earth, one would consider that in a way, fire does produce. Huh? Fire does produce Earth. Therefore, this is a sentimental pillar. Ping Shi is sentimental pillar, as it sits on the Wu Earth. It sits on rock wealth, and this is a career pillar representing a very good pillar for a business person. And of course, direct resource is very much about education and very much about being very charitable. The direct resource sitting on direct wealth would represent an entrepreneur, even though successful, but to them, money is not too much of the end goal. And they tend to be very charitable by nature. They tend to help people more than just focusing on making big money. Therefore, here we find that this co-founder of Netflix has that tendency to manifest the direct resource sitting on rock wealth star. But direct resource people tend to lack managerial experience. Therefore, they tend to have trouble managing people. And so Reed Hastings, when he co-founded the company, he tendered his resignation to the board of directors. He explained to them that he's not really prepared to face the challenges of a CEO as losing confidence. But of course, the board refused, and he was then pushed to learn to be learn to be a business person. Therefore, this would be the case where direct resource are not very well suited to manage people. So therefore, that's one of the challenges that direct resource people needs to be aware. A direct resource sitting on eating God is good, because direct resource and eating God is very good, as direct resource controls eating God. And therefore, they become highly auspicious, and it is also highly creative. So the eating God style will be able to be creative and inventive in the nature. Therefore, this will be also good to find direct resource sitting on eating God. Now let's take a look into direct resource sitting on hurting office. Hurting officer usually consider that there is a very non-sentimental countering, because they are both of them will be of the same polarity. And so if negative, it tends to affect the ability to create wealth and the ability to make the right decision itself. And therefore, this will be the case whereby there is a risk that they are marked by errors and mistake due to impaired judgment. Now, not saying that all direct resource sitting on officer will be as such, but it just means that there must be certain roles that people play that should not render them to be in a certain so-called roles that they play. Here, let's take a look into the person by the name of Colonel Dyer. Now, this person was a British Army officer, and acting as a brigadier general. He was responsible for the Amritsar massacre that took place during the early years when Indians were fighting with the Mahatma Gandhi, looking for the independence of India. And he was instrumental in ordering fire and to a large gathering of people, which on some account 1,500 innocent people died while they were listening to speeches calling for the independence of India. And so here we see that the person has a direct resource sitting on hurting officers, certain officer. Now, more often than not in the ancient texts, in military organization, hurting officer is a rebel. Hurting officer is a person. Well, a hurting officer hurts the officer. It hurts the well-established organization. And in a way, one can consider that his action hurts the British army or the British Raj at that time. And in fact, this Amritsar massacre has so angered the Indian populace, and it drives towards it becoming what is called a decisive steps towards the end of British rule in India, as to what some historians would argue. And so here we will consider that uh, that direct resource sitting on hurting officer may result in making errors or impact judgments that might have been instrumental in certain decisions that they can make as well. Okay, so bottom line, this may not be considered to be something that is normally considered to be auspicious. But in a way, we can also see that this is Jawud sitting on earth. Now, wood controls earth. Therefore, this is a controlling pillar. Now, generally, once again, everything is generally. Controlling pillar is inauspicious. Therefore, that's where we consider as it is. Now, let's continue. Direct resource sitting on indirect wealth. Indirect wealth is entrepreneurial and business endeavor. Therefore, looking into potentially a generally an auspicious formation, one can consider that. And here we have Sir Alexander Fleming. Alexander Fleming was known to have discovered an effective antibody substance called penicillin. So has he discovered penicillin G? He has been attributed to have a single greatest victory over disease. So he's look into his chart. This is a Rainwater Day Master that has a direct resource protruded to the year stamp sitting on indirect wealth. Therefore, having this particular structure would be where we have a direct resource sitting on indirect wealth, representing that the person would be quite inventive. So usually this would be where direct resource sitting on indirect wealth would be inventive. Now, indirect wealth represents wealth that is generated usually without work. Therefore, making money without work. Now, usually when you have a patent or when you're the owner of intellectual property, you able to monetize your ownership of assets without the laborer's work. Therefore, direct resource sitting on indirect wealth represents an inventor. Represents an inventor, represents those who are in R&D. Those who are able to use their knowledge, intellect in generating new research, new concept, new discovery that they could monetize. That would be the pillar for such. This will be the pillar that we can look for. As we look have for direct resource sitting on indirect wealth. Alright, so as we look into all these are what represents the career choices pathway that people can. Now we take a look into direct resource sitting on direct wealth. So direct resource sitting on direct wealth. Now, when direct resource sits on indirect wealth, we are looking into an inventor or an R&D that monetize from their patent and intellectual property. And here we have a brilliant Rosalind Franklin who was known to have contributed substantially to the discovery of the DNA structure in her work. And therefore here, uh, this represents an individual who is able to uh, uh, able to represent individuals who can rise to their career in providing that kind of support because direct resource is about knowledge, about discovery, and in a way, when direct resource sits on direct wealth is one that controls, one that controls. But this control, of course, is a G of controlling Kueh water. Basically, it is a seven killing to the Kueh water. And then this creates also quite a very good, compelling pillar that we make. Now, this pillar, usually when it's controlling, there are also other issues that surround them. Usually, they are more prone to sudden or chronic illnesses. If you take a look into another, which is a direct resource, we have Ralph Baer. Ralph Baer is known to be the father of video games. Therefore, this will be a a Yeatwood Day Master. Yeatwood Day Master born in the peak of spring during the rabbit month. This is a very strong Day Master. And we also have Run Water as the direct resource. It is rooted, therefore is reasonably strong. So we have a strong Day Master and a strong direct resource. And this direct resource sits on direct wealth. Sits on direct wealth. Also representing an inventor, representing somebody who contributes something new. And because when one sits on a year, it brings more reputation. It brings more reputation because the year pillar is the first pillar that people see, the first impression, and that brings about the so-called the so-called manifestation of the direct resource in the person's chart. Alright, so direct resource sitting on 7K star is auspicious, as per mentioned. Direct resource sitting on direct officer is also favorable. So direct resource sitting on indirect wealth also to a certain degree somewhat reasonable as well. Okay, and of course direct resource sitting on another direct resource. And so here we have a Keng Day Master, the Edwin Powell Hubble of the Hubble telescope, astronomer establishing fields in astronomy. We have a direct resource sitting on direct resource. So it's direct resource sitting on direct resource, representing a very strong direct resource Day Master. Alright, so these are looking into what direct resource sitting on it. And now here comes to the next point that we want to identify. So as we look into direct resource, so we look into direct resource sitting on, we look into those that are protruding, those that are protruding and penetrating, and then we see whether are they sitting on indirect wealth or are they sitting on direct wealth, direct officer, or whatnot. So this represents the first part looking into direct resource protrusion. So it gives them the sense of how these people are usually, so direct resource are people who normally gain their reputation, esteem, or they make life through knowledge. Through knowledge. Through invention. The key theme is information. So we have the founder of Netflix, dissemination of information, entertainment. We have scientists, astrophysics. We have educators that centers on knowledge and invention. And so these are for people who have direct resource protruded into the stems. And so when we look into the charts, we can guide them towards this particular direction. So when we read a person's chart, they have direct resource protruded. We can suggest to them that they can look into areas if they're looking for direction of what kind of work can they do, what kind of business can they do. Then it's about information, it's about knowledge, it's about invention, it's about R&D, it's about coming with something new, producing new knowledge, new concept. So that's what direct resource can do. And if you can recall, now that we look into checking for presence and location, and what happens when they are now hidden? What happens when they are now hidden? If they're hidden, normally it does represent that their intellect is not seen, their intellect is not observed. That is one thing. And now, can you please tell me what is the worst place for direct resource to be hidden? Anybody? What is the worst place for direct resource to be hidden? The worst place for direct resource to be hidden is in the tomb. Correct, no? The worst place for direct resource to be hidden is in the tomb. It can only be in the tomb if it is an earth. And when earth sees another earth, if it's earth seeing another earth, also direct resource in the tomb. Now, chances are when there is earth and earth, it will likely be a clash, like a dog and a dragon. Or it can be a bullying punishment or whatnot. Therefore, this normally could denote the risk of mental illness. Mental illnesses, schizophrenia. Therefore, that could be into one part, or mental torture. And this mental torture can also be in the form of the devouring mother. The devouring mother. All right. Now let's take, but be careful of diagnosis devouring mother. It's not all the time. Now let's take a look into, I think she's a Tan Sri by now. Tan Sri Michelle Yeoh. She won the Oscar, I think, for the best actress performing this year. So she's good. Michelle Yeoh is one of those movie stars that did her own stunt and having a 7K fasa makes her having the propensity of taking risks. So she goes into martial art. She goes into it. Now, for a woman, mother represents the indirect resource. Not the direct resource, but the indirect resource. And therefore, her mother is here. But do not get mistaken that it is hidden. The mother is hidden. But it's not hidden under an earth branch. It's hidden in a grove. It's hidden in a grove branch. Hidden in a grove branch is fine. It's good. Because it also indicates that it's increasing. So therefore, that's fine. But she does have a tiger mom. Literally, the mother is in the tiger branch. So her mother does shape her life and influence her and give her the right direction during her early years, push her to where she was or where she is right now, in a way. So the mother does play a pivotal role in her life. shaping it, and it's hidden in the grove. So therefore, that is not considered to be inauspicious. And even if the mother is found to be, this part is now totally hidden. So when we say totally hidden, we mean this really, totally hidden. Hidden and totally hidden. So therefore, there will be two parts to it, the totally. But of course, this is a grove branch. It is not counted to be the inauspicious that we refer to. So normally when we talk about completely hidden, it would be in the tomb of the earth branches, to consider that to be somewhat that we can mention. So therefore, this would be some of the problems that we can encounter when looking into the negative effects of direct resource. Because in a way, direct resource is always auspicious. So the exception would be the exception to this would be when on direct. So, but bear in mind, only if it's nowhere else. That means completely hidden. If it is penetrated, then it doesn't count. Then this is not to be read anymore. It's not to be read. It has been protruded. Or if it is also onto the main chi, it is also not to be read. Not to be read. Or if it is in a direct resource of a growth branch, then it is also not to be read. Not to be read as having mental illness or devouring mother syndrome. Only when it's completely hidden means only when it's only found in the tomb, nowhere else, not protruded and not anywhere else. Then we may then see that this may have a consideration. As soon as we look into now what are the other problems that we also see. Let's look into direct resource related problems. Now, there is an idiom in Chinese that is 折上摊兵, which means literally it means paper, on paper discussing military affairs. Now, this idiom came about roughly about 260 BC during the Warring States, where the son of a very famous war general, Chao Guo, his name, and in fact, he was a brilliant scholar. He loves to read military strategies as a text, and he would be such an eloquent debate on military affairs. But despite his brilliance in military affairs, his knowledge, as he is so good in arguing and so good in talking about military strategies, his own father wasn't impressed. In fact, on the deathbed of his father, he told his wife, please do not ensure that our son becomes a war general. But as it may be, during a period of the warring state, the king of the state, eventually employed him to be a war general. And his own mother protested. Their own mother begged the king not to get his son to be employed as one. But the king stubbornly refused, and of course appointed him to be the war general, and immediately he launched an aggressive attack against a larger enemy, was surrounded, and eventually the army was defeated. And so some historians contributed that the war, the Battle of Changping, lost about 600,000 people, where in a way, their own state lost about nearly 0.4 million people during that war or that battle, so to speak. And so it came about such a disastrous military conflict that has eventually led to the demise of the state. This idiom came about. And so in today's context, it means armchair generals. It means people who are brilliant in theory, people who can talk brilliant about business strategies. You can find many of them maybe in universities, professors teaching business strategies, talking about ways of how companies can be successful. So these are direct resource related problems. So the strength of direct resource, they lie in academic pursuit. They lie in new concepts applications. Therefore, when we read direct resource, they should be providers of information, academics, scientists, R&D personnel, IT related professions. You can find them doing big success over there. But the thing about direct resource is that their approach are very philosophical and conceptual arguments at best. And at that stage, they tend to be very detached from handling people. And so should a direct resource structure person ask the question, should I do business? The business that you should do is being self-employed. Direct resource can be excellent self-employed professionals. Run your own business, but not be in business. So not managing people, but basically a business where you yourself becomes the key person. Therefore, this would be one of the direct resource related issues that they have on how we can then overcome their weaknesses as well. So direct resource people are very comfortable working in solitude. You just give them room and space and time to do their own research. Leave them be. And if they have business idea, unless they sit on rock wealth or indirect wealth, if they sit on rock wealth or indirect wealth, that is fine. If not, then they should leave the day-to-day to others. Therefore, this would be one way to consider how do we handle armchair generals. So we capitalize on their brilliance in academics, brilliance in their research, and then we work around that. But usually they would be better working under a larger organizations. And so we find that, this is Hubble, to which the Hubble telescope was named after him. And he shouldn't be working on his own. He should be working under a big organization that can have the resources to provide him with the resources, with the support for his research. And likewise to people like Rosalind Franklin with the DNA, they need laboratories with well-funded research, so-called resources for them. So these are the people whom will find that they are best to be employed. The best to be employed, the best to hold very, very key roles in focusing on what they do. Okay, so now we take a look into the one problems with the direct resource people. If they are too strong or overwhelming, what kind of element if they face one. Okay, let's move along to the second problem, which is the 子木座白, which actually means, sorry, my pronunciation is not good, the benevolent mother that destroys her child. Now, when reading Pa Zhi Chat, more so for men, but it is both for both. Direct resource is the mother. The mother plays a tremendous, substantial role in shaping the character and the personality of the person and the value systems. Now, this reading may be very useful for women when if young and single women ask you for an advice, especially if you are the reader for them, that they are interested to consider marriage or to be with this man as their partners. And then this will be where, the mother-in-law problem, isn't it? Women may have this issue with the mother-in-law. Therefore, this will be the benevolent mother destroying. So that is where the presence, location, and strength of the direct resource can reveal many layers that shapes the person's personality. So what happens here is is for mothers. Is for mothers who read the chart of own children, for them to be ready to acknowledge that despite the love that they have for their children, despite what they want for their children, that sometimes, despite all the well intentions, their actions bring harm. In today's language, we have what we call the helicopter parent. Anybody knows what a helicopter parenting means? The helicopter parenting actually denotes an overprotective parent. Overprotective, over nurturing, to the point that the children lack the necessary skills to survive the real world. Because the mother protects them from criticism, protect them from being scolded. And we find certain children grow, even though they are adults. In fact, I think not too long ago in this country, there was a very young medical doctor. He graduated as a medical doctor, and he was rejected in his love pursuit, and he committed suicide. Because this is where sometimes we find young adults, even though they are already young adults, they are still not prepared to face the real world. Maybe this may be a little bit borrowed from the story, the early days of Buddha, where he was born a prince, and he was in a palace of luxury with all the servants meeting all his needs, to which he has never seen suffering. And so, even though he was already an adult, married, it was shocking for him to discover that there is suffering in this world. And so, this is where the benevolent mother may shape the child's perspective. So therefore, this may be the case of the over-domineering resource. But in a more serious case, where we find the devouring mother to be now one where the mother becomes over-domineering to the point that the person becomes timid, pessimistic, and guilt-driven. And the person lead a life trying to please the mother and the dreams and expectations, living the whole life not fulfilling their own ability to exert their own strength. So, therefore, this will be looking into the broader sense of problems related to direct resource. Remedies. Now, what are the remedies that we can have for direct resource? First and overall, direct resource people don't really handle other people very well. And because they are sometimes intelligent, they tend to come across as somebody who is an intellectual snob. They don't like to, direct resource people can be very helpful. They are very helpful. Direct resource people can be very helpful. But they themselves don't like to ask for help. So they feel that they should be the one giving and not receiving. Therefore, direct resource people may be one of those that gives, giving. They gives and don't receive. And they don't receive. I hope that's just simple English. They like to give. They like to be charitable. But they don't like to receive. They don't receive. They're not good in that. They're not very good at that. Which actually results in them not forging harmonious relationship. And therefore, perhaps all direct resource people, in fact, everyone, should think about practicing what we call the Benjamin Franklin effect. The Benjamin Franklin effect is a cognitive bias amongst humans that these humans somehow begin to like somebody more, they like somebody more if they do that person a favor. So this favor is a very easy favor, simple favor. By just turning around to a stranger, I mean, you can just approach a stranger and say, excuse me, do you have a pen? I need to borrow a pen for a while. Thank you so much. No, can you just pour me a cup of water, please? Thank you so much. And therefore, in a way, small favors, not too big, not too demanding, and allow the person to do some small favors with you. And when they do the favor, they tend to like you better. And therefore, for direct resource, this can impress people that you are not almighty, independent, smart, but you are actually can be humble. So this would be to endear people to actually to allow direct resource people to step out from their comfort zone, step out from their box, and to engage the real world. Because that's one thing about the so-called direct resource, that they're quite idealist, no? In a way. They're quite perfectionist. And they very seldom want to admit that they have weaknesses. That is the direct resource working there. The other thing about direct resource people is the excessive direct resource, excessive resources makes a wood a floating wood, make a water muddy water, make an earth burn out. And therefore, excess resource needs to flow. And direct resource would like to meet, direct resource people would like to meet eating God, would like to meet hurting officer. And therefore, these are output. And for those who do not have output stars, one way to balance out the flow of the chi, one way to balance out the flow. Because if you have the flow, if there is a flow in your chart, that is very, very smooth. I mean, let's take a look into Rosalind Franklin. Look at her steps. Do you see a flow in the chart? Metal produces what? Metal produces water. And therefore, Feng water produces Kui water. 7K producing direct resource. Auspicious. And what does water produce? Water produces wood. Water produces. And therefore here we have direct resource producing the day master. And so there will be, so this will be called, they call it the heavenly flow. They call this the heavenly flow. Heavenly flow. I wouldn't know what's the hour chart, and if the hour chart is also production, therefore this means a royal flush. Every stem produces the other in a sequence. Then whole life would be as it is. But I don't think so, because she actually suffered from some disease. So I think there will be mostly an earth branch. But anyway, sorry, that will be just another thinking. So anyway, this would be a flow. And so, if one have excessive resource, one of the readings of excessive resource is lazy. One of the excessive resource is they work aimlessly. Floating wood, burn out earth. And therefore, output also denote by exerting physical activities. Therefore, for parents, if you have children who have a lot of direct resource that lacks the so-called output stars, then engaging in physical activities is movement. Movements would then be something that can be very useful. They can keep them healthy and keep them on the go. Because by working on the output, this activates the 7K light, the 7K light activities, and the hurting officer light nature. Because direct resource can see 7K. Direct resource can see 7K. Direct resource can see EG and hurting officer. The one thing that direct resource doesn't like to see is wealth. Because wealth controls direct resource. That is why some mothers to the men don't like to see the wife. Because the wife represents the wealth of the man, which represents the direct resource. So that's where there is a bit of a conflict between them. The mother is more skeptical and more choosy about the man with the direct resource. And so this is where the devouring mother controls the day master. And if the day master allows the mother to devour him or her, then the day master may not get to marry the person that he or she has chosen. It finds that there is a difficulty in flowing to the next part, because direct resource controls output. When direct resource controls output, and when output is severely restrained or controlled, output cannot produce. Output cannot produce direct wealth, cannot produce wealth. And therefore here, a devouring mother prevents the men, especially from marrying who they like. This is to appease the mother. Therefore, the man has a conflict, and this conflict can be perpetuated through the entire life, creating that kind of familial conflict that brings the conflict of interest and the sickness in them. Now, for chronic devouring mother syndrome, those may need real professional help. A psychologist, a psychiatrist that may provide better counseling into how the how the day master may seek to overcome a controlling, devouring mother syndrome. But for more manageable cases, it is not, in my opinion, to be confrontational. It is not the ideal scenario to put the person to choose between the mother or other issues in life. To avoid may not necessarily be good. To rebel, to hate, to resent may not be the case. Therefore, this would be. And so one may consider that perhaps the way to embrace and to overcome the devouring mother will be to appreciate that the mother's love for the child, the mother's greatest fear for the child, is that no one will love them like they do. And perhaps it is for the day master to give comfort, assuage that no one will replace the love that the mother has, and to bring them a greater sense of security, a sense that they will not lose their place when they will not lose their children as their children grow up. Therefore, that would be the way to embrace the overcoming devouring mother syndrome. But anyway, that would be just looking. Last but not least, the direct resource represents nobleman. Direct resource represents the one that Feng Shui activation can be used. Now, the thing about Feng Shui activation is like calling for the wind. Calling for the wind. Feng Shui. Calling for the wind. But sometimes I see people, they keep calling for the wind, but they don't have a boat. They didn't prepare a boat. There's no boat. And they didn't set the sail. So if there is no boat, and if you have a boat and the sail is not set, calling for the wind doesn't really help. I find people activating for wealth Then I ask them, oh, you activate wealth. Very good. Uh, what activities recently have you done to ensure that wealth can come to you? Or that part they didn't do. They just focus on calling for the wind. So, well, don't call for the wind if you don't have a boat. And don't call for the wind if you're not ready to set sail in the area. Therefore, prepare the boat, set the sail, then call for the wind. So when the wind comes, then the boat will sail. So I think, so because this is sometimes I need to want to remind, because sometimes we have people who activate feng shui, but then they come to realize that, I mean, devouring mother problem won't change by activation. It doesn't happen so easily. In fact, for the devouring mother, this may be normally you don't activate the direct resource because direct resource is activated if the direct resource is weak. So if the direct resource is weak, and it is favorable, then one can consider activating it. All right. Therefore, one is to strengthen if one doesn't have that resource element. Okay, so in all very quickness, if we're looking at, okay, what are we looking at? Okay, let's say if you're looking into this person is a pink fire lady. Pink fire lady should marry late. Pink fire lady shouldn't marry early because the husband represents the Kueh water, and Kueh water is a cloud. Kueh water is the cloud that hides the sun. So therefore, pink lady shouldn't marry early. Therefore, that's one thing. And furthermore, this pink lady, fire, though she has a husband, though lady sitting on husband looks like a happy marriage, but there is a 7K here. And furthermore, this is harm. Therefore, the goat harms the rat. The career harms the marriage. Therefore, career harms the marriage may have a little bit of an issue. By the way, that is just one of the other readings that we can have. But the other part is also the mother. Alright. And therefore, if one wishes to strengthen the mother or strengthen the resource represents, indirect resource represents a weak and would like to call for the nobleman. Therefore, this is where one can say that the direction can be clear. So I think, but this is just a bit basic. I think more activation can come in to possibly another session. But anyway, we can see that if the Jiawood represents the direction, where is the wood? Where is the Jiawood? So the Jiawood represents the east one, represents the east one to be activated. But anyway, we also consider that looking into feng shui can also tell the chart. The east one here may represents the laundry room. So sometimes it also represents a part where it's not easy to activate at times when we consider this. By the way, this is just a little bit more about looking into what are the remedies that one can have for the direct resource problem. All right, so that wraps up on our today's sharing, and that wraps up also on the last part of the direct resource. And with this, next sharing will be in August. So we'll be taking quite a 2 months break. Apologies for that. I will see you in August then. So keep in touch, and then I will just forward you the dates and the material there. Okay, good night, everybody. I will see you then.